Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a video, or like a tag I guess, that was recently resurrected, I guess, in a way, because they created a part 2 of this tag, but I decided to redo my part 1 of this and as well as do part 2, which will be up in a couple of days. But this is of course the palette tag created by Allie Glines and Samantha March, and like I said, I did do the original tag of this ages ago. I forgot that I did it. I thought I didn't do it, which is why I wanted to do it again. But then when I was going through the questions, I was like, I'm sure that I did this before, but it's been a while. My collection has changed a lot, so I just thought that I would redo it because I love palettes and I'll share with you my collection. So I will redo the part 1 today, and then not my next video, but the video after that will be part 2 with the new questions. So that is what I'm going to do today. But if you are new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. But let's jump into the video. So for question number 1, we have my newest palette, and my newest palette is my Rose Quartz palette by Huda Beauty. I recently picked this up, and I didn't even actually pick it up for myself. Originally I was picking this up for a friend, but she already had it in her collection, which I did not know, so I just decided to keep it, and I'm not unhappy about that at all. I actually have not yet played with this palette. I really want to, but it's only recently that I realized that, because I was giving it to her as a gift, and it's just recently that I realized that she already has it, so I was keeping it pristine for her. But yeah, I definitely need to play around with this soon because it's a beautiful color story, and I also think it will be beautiful for like now when it's early spring, because when we get into more summer, I don't think I'm going to want to reach for this as much, so I'm definitely going to make a note to reach for this in the next month. On the other end of that, we have my oldest palette, which is my Anastasia Modern Renaissance palette. I picked this up in 2016, and that is currently my oldest palette. I won't show you the inside because I don't want to spoil you my palette, because this is my palette for this year. But yeah, this is definitely my oldest palette, and it's getting a lot of views, and obviously, like I said, I am trying to finish this year as my palette, so hopefully I can manage to do that. But it's definitely time to move out because, like I said, it is from 2016 and it's my oldest palette. Next up, we have my most expensive palette, and this one is very heavy here. I'm holding it in my hands currently, and this is my Utopian Dreams palette by Mcgrath. Don't mind this fingerprints, it gets super fingerprinty because of the packaging. But this one, like I said, is the Utopian Dream palette, and it is so stunning. I got this for my birthday last year from my boyfriend, and yeah, I really love this. But it is the most expensive palette that I have in my collection, and you can really tell because, like I said, it is really heavy, really nice packaging. It has a really nice mirror. Yeah, it's just a beautiful palette. I actually wore this the other day for me and my boyfriend's anniversary, and I love this palette so much, but that is my most expensive one. For most affordable, I have a couple of palettes to share with you because they are basically the same and they are in the same price range, and that is my Colourpop 9 palettes. I only have 4 of them left in my collection, and these are my most affordable ones. They're no longer my favorites, but these are the 4 that I've held on to. Out of these, the Mar palette is no longer like the original Mar palette. I have frankened that a bit and redid it, but the other 3, I guess, are my favorite 9-pan palette, which is the Going Coconut, the Soul palette, as well as the Lilac Lot. So those are definitely my most affordable palettes in my collection. I used to have more drugstore palettes, but I don't anymore. I have decluttered most of them or used them up, and currently I am just, I don't know, it's not like I like the most expensive things, but I just feel like when it comes to drugstore things, you can find really good quality, but also with packaging, things like that, they always break, and I just feel like overall the quality is a bit better when you go to at least a mid-range. But these are the most affordable palettes that I own. So far these palettes have all been very kind of factual, like obviously oldest, newest, most expensive, cheapest, you know. But moving forward, we're gonna do a bit more of kind of choice, so it's definitely getting harder from this point out. But next up we have everyday palette, and I would say that probably my favorite everyday palette is my Anastasia Gold palette. I love this palette. I have used it quite a lot recently in different projects, and I'm definitely getting use out of it. But this is a beautiful everyday palette because it has those really sparkly eyeshadows. You can do a bit more kind of taupey shades down here, but it mainly is a warm tone palette, which is what I personally like for everyday. And yeah, I like this because it does have like more kind of sparkly special shades, but it's not super like over the top that I only use it for special occasions. It is still an everyday palette, but it is like a little bit extra, which is why I like it. So yeah, this is my everyday palette of choice. For best memory, I decided to pick my Star Wars Mandalorian palette, and the reason why I'm picking this for best memory, this is a very well loved palette I guess in my collection. I mean not super I guess, but I have 3 pans, which is good. And the reason why this is the best memory is because first of all I got this for my boyfriend, and he picked this up for Christmas for me because I shared with him this palette because he is a massive Star Wars fan, and I just thought it was funny that like, you know, a makeup brand did a Star Wars palette, so I shared it with him, this palette, not thinking anything of it. But then he did actually pick this up for me for Christmas, and I had no clue. But it's the best memory for me because obviously that, but also every time I look at this, it just makes me think of my boyfriend because of Star Wars, but also because he got it for me. He has gotten me other palettes as well, but this one is definitely the one that kind of is most special to me because it is kind of like the ultimate mix of like 2 of our hobbies. Like one of my biggest hobbies obviously makeup, and he is really a Star Wars fan. So yeah, this is definitely the one that has the best memory in my collection. So for most colorful palette, I decided to pick my Naked Tutorials and Beauty Bay palette. This one is quite a colourful one. I don't really have a pure rainbow palette, which is why this is probably my most colourful one. It still has a few neutrals in it, but yeah, I think this is definitely the most kind of colourful in the sense of like it has a mix of loads of colours. Obviously I think it's like the Honey palette, which is obviously very colourful. It only has yellows, but for this prompt I wanted to pick something that has loads of different colors, and I think this is the one that is most colorful in my collection, so I decided to go with this one. Next up we have another one that is very kind of obviously like a given because it is my smallest palette, and for that I have my Natasha Denona Mini Retro palette, which is also really new to my collection. I got this at the same time as the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette, but the reason why I decided to put the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz palette as my most recent palette is because, like I said, that palette I did not consider my palette until very recently, but I did pick them up at the same time. But yeah, this is definitely my smallest palette. It is a 5-pan palette, which is the smallest that I own, and yeah, do I own any quads or anything? I don't think I do anymore. I do own like duos, but I don't count them as palettes, but this one I do count it as palettes, and that's why I'm picking this one. Again, I haven't used this yet. I really need to play around with this, but I'm just been very overwhelmed with eyeshadows that I'm panning, and I've been focusing on those. But this is definitely one that I do want to reach for, and I'm so excited to have this in my collection because I wanted this for the longest time. For biggest palette, apart from obviously my single eyeshadow palette because they are bigger, I have again decided to go with my Naked Tutorials and Beauty Bay palette. This is the biggest one I have. It's not super thick, but it's quite a thick palette, and it is also quite big. And yeah, it's definitely my biggest palette, and it looks like this. So yeah, I already showed you this, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but this is my largest palette in my collection. So next up we have Worth the Hype, and for this one I thought of a lot of palettes to pick, but one that I really wanted to, I didn't want to pick something that was too obvious or something that was like overhyped but still worth the hype. I don't know, like I was thinking for example like the Club Nebula palette, I really like that one, Natasha Denona Gold palette, the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. There was so many I could pick, but I really did want to give this palette a shout out because I think this is definitely worth the hype. It's definitely, like I would say it's even like better than the hype, and that is the Tiny Molars palette, because I think that this one obviously did get a lot of hype, but you don't hear very much about it anymore, and I do think it's such a beautiful palette. It's a beautiful color story. It's a very unique palette to my collection. This is definitely a palette that I would still consider kind of like a neutral everyday palette, but it has those like colors, but since the colors are a bit more muted, yeah, they work a bit better for every day. But this is a beautiful palette. The formula is amazing, and the shimmers are like really foiled. The mattes are very blendable, like the typical Sydney Grace formula, and this is just a beautiful palette. I'm so happy that I picked this up, and obviously it is very sad about Mel, and I just wanted to give this palette a shout out because I really love this palette, and yeah, that is why I decided to pick this one for Worth the Hype. Next up we have the question Not Worth the Hype, and with this one, like, it's so difficult because if it's brands that I don't really like palettes that I just don't think is worth it, I usually end up decluttering them. But I would say out of the palettes I still have in my collection, a brand that is very hyped that I just don't think is worth the hype. I'm not saying these are necessarily bad palettes, but they're just not worth all the hype that this brand has gotten over the last couple of years, and that is Colourpop. So I already showed you my 9 pans, and obviously I still love the brand. Like, I still have the Colourpop Mandalorian palette, the Charlotte palette. I love that palette. I think it's like a really nice unique color story, and the formula in that one is really nice. but it's just not better than a lot of other brands, and again, it's not really worth the hype to me. I also have these three right here. I have the Sweet Talk palette, the At First Sight palette, and the Flooded By palette. I got these two recently from a friend. And yeah, I haven't really played around with them that much, but like I said, they're not bad palettes. I really like one of them, and I have no plan of decluttering these anytime soon. But yeah, they're just not worth the hype to me, or like they're not worth as much as hype as I have gotten, if that makes sense. And that is why I decided to choose Colourpop. There is, for example, a Colourpop palette that I'm going to mention in my next video of this, like part 2 of this video, that I absolutely love, and it's for the prompt I did not expect to love, which I will show you in that video. But there is formulas and there is palettes from them that I really like, but yeah, I think they're just a bit overhyped. So for the next prompt, this was really difficult to pick because this is a favorite palette from a favorite brand, and I don't really know what my favorite brand would be. But when it comes to eyeshadows, I was thinking, like, if I could only buy from one brand moving forward, like what kind of brand would I want in my collection? What is the brand that if I had to get rid of all other eyeshadows palettes in my collection and just like continue buying from one brand, what would it be? And I do actually think it would be Anastasia now. So obviously, like, she doesn't have as many like colorful palettes. She has a couple. She like recently released a pastel palette, which I really am interested in buying. But like, I know it's like maybe not as fun as some other palettes, but it's just such a nice quality. It's also the experience of these palettes. I really love them. And like, I already showed the palette, but my favorite out of the palettes that I own from her, I currently own this one, the Metropolis, the Love palette, and the Sunrise palette. So I own 4 palettes from her currently, and this one is my favorite. This one is just the best of the best when it comes to her formula. The mattes are so creamy, the shimmers are fantastic. Like, I really love this palette, and yeah, this is definitely my favorite. Yeah, this is definitely my favorite palette from her. It is sadly discontinued, which sucks because it's a beautiful palette, but yeah, this is definitely my favorite from her. I'm so glad I got this before it was discontinued. I got this as a Christmas present for my parents, not this Christmas but the year before, and I absolutely love this palette, and it is my favorite palette from Anastasia now. Then for the last prompt, we have my most used palette, and I have decided to go to my Modern Renaissance palette again. Again, I'm not going to show you inside, but if you saw my last Project Pan update, you know what it looks like, and also you can see my next update going up end of this month. But it's definitely my most used palette, and yeah, I was thinking, if I obviously this is my Panda palette, which is also why it's very used, but it was very used before I introduced this as my Panda palette, but it's definitely even more used now. But this is my most used palette. If I like excluded my Panda palette, I would probably say my Magic Mini palette is my most used palette, because I have like a lot of pans in that palette, and it's not necessarily the palette that I have reached for most as like an exclusive palette, but I have reached for that palette so much as a companion palette to other looks. But at the moment, my Modern Renaissance is definitely my most used palette, and hopefully I will be able to finish it this year. And those were actually all the 13 questions in this tag. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And otherwise, I will catch you in my next video, and make sure to keep an eye out for part 2 of this video, which will be up not the next video but the video after that. So keep an eye out for that, and yeah, I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are.